Infrastructure projects don't get much more challenging than an airport. These places have to be both practical and symbolic. Oh, and construction usually happens on high security sites between round-the-clock flights. From Arctic tundra to massive man-made islands, sit back and get ready to take in how some of the world's most impressive airports were built.
I'm currently standing in the middle of one of the busiest airport runways in the world. But don't worry, it's all good. It's currently shut because construction teams back there behind me are working to resurface it before tomorrow's first plane touches down pretty much where I'm standing. Now, that plane has already taken off and is currently in the air on its way here. So the race is seriously on.
Now, we know that resurfacing a runway bit by bit each night for over 3 kilometres might sound like one of the world's most boring construction projects. But this is no ordinary bit of road laying. It's a critical piece of infrastructure that millions of people, thousands of businesses, the UK's wider economy, and airports around the world all depend on. The stakes are insanely high, and what this team's trying to pull off in such a tight time frame puts them in a different league of pressure.
If a piece of the runway breaks out and ends up in an aircraft engine, the result's potentially catastrophic, because there's no room for a mistake.
If you've ever travelled into London, you're probably familiar with Gatwick Airport. It's one of the UK's busiest, home to more than 50 airlines flying to over 200 destinations. But when it first opened back in the 1930s, it was just a small flyers club. Over the years, it's been used as a public aerodrome, Royal Air Force Base, and then in the 1950s it was renovated and officially opened as London's second airport. For a while, Gatwick was run by a government agency, but in the 80s it was privatised and had to start finding its own revenue. Since its official opening, Gatwick's gone from seeing less than 500,000 people pass through each year to more than 45 million at its peak in 2019. But that all dipped massively when the pandemic hit in 2020. Just look at how aircraft traffic around Gatwick plummeted in March alone. To say that's been bad for business would be putting it lightly. For around 2 years, Gatwick was losing roughly £1 million a day on average. And losses like that make construction projects like this a tough sell for a business that needs to cut costs. But as travellers head back to the skies, Gatwick's working hard to return to full capacity.
It's difficult to overstate just how much goes into making every travel experience possible. Throughout this 1,600-acre campus, there are people issuing tickets, checking passports, manning security, loading bags, monitoring the weather, directing air traffic, and so much more. And being here with the team up close and getting to go behind the scenes shows me that the work never really stops. There are just a few hours of the day where that constant flow of planes slows down a bit, and even then there are hundreds of people getting ready for the next rush to begin the following morning.
Of course, the runway is the backbone of the whole operation. Without it, the airport becomes more like a shopping mall with a car park. If this single stretch of asphalt is out of service, the whole thing is thrown off. Flights get delayed, terminals get crowded, baggage claim gets backed up, and pretty soon you have a whole lot of stressed out travellers. And not just in the UK, this has a knock-on effect at airports around the world. Gatwick has 2 terminals, north and south, but there's just one massive runway for all incoming and outgoing flights, making this one of the busiest single runway airports in the world. There's a second smaller runway that's on standby, but it's currently only used in good visibility or for emergencies. The main runway is 44 metres wide and over 3.3 kilometres long, the size of more than 1,400 tennis courts. It was built 70 years ago with concrete and has been paved over with new asphalt over the decades, but it wasn't designed to last forever. On a busy day, the main runway can handle more than 950 arrivals and departures. At some points, 55 planes are flying in and out of Gatwick every hour, and flight paths need to be meticulously coordinated around the availability of the runway. Squeezed in between the waves of traffic, a gap is created for the airfield operations team to run in and make sure there's no debris or birds in the way. To make planning even more complicated, everything can change with a shift of the breeze. Planes actually work best if they're flying into the wind. So if the wind is blowing to the west, everyone flies in and out of the east. But if the direction of the wind changes in the evening, everything flips to the other direction. It's a 24-hour operation, and the margin for error is tight.
So Gatwick has an incredibly busy runway. It does up to 950 aircraft movements on a busy day, 55 movements an hour in the middle of the day. It takes quite a pounding on the surface. So what we're doing here is replacing the surface of the runway to make it last for about another 7 or 8 years.
I thought publishing a YouTube video every week was tough, but this is a whole new level of deadline pressure. For months, the construction team at Gatwick is working with military precision to repave the runway between around 9:30 p.m. and 5 a.m. every night.
And, the stakes are really important. All of our airlines expect us to deliver the schedule every day. All of them will be queuing up at 6:30 in the morning, waiting to get on that runway. And if we don't hand that runway back on time, the airline schedules are screwed for the rest of the day, sometimes 2 or 3 days.
This will actually be the 5th time that the Gatwick runway has been rehabilitated. It was last resurfaced in 2012. This new batch of asphalt is designed to last around 7 years, and they're focusing the most resilient bits of it on the parts of the runway that the planes traffic the most.
It's not just your standard asphalt that gets stuck on the road outside your house or the pavement you walk down every day. So you've got a really high specification material, which is why we have to build a batching plant on site so that we can batch the material here ourselves.
As you're probably realising, this isn't your standard construction project. We're talking about an airport here, which means there's a lot of security. Before anyone, including me and the B1M film crew, can get to the construction site, you have to pass through the same security as if you were flying. That means every night more than 100 people and 40 trucks full of material have to be screened before any work can begin. It's probably not a great idea to show up late for this shift. At around 6:30 every night, 2 asphalt production plants are switched on in preparation for the night shift. While it may look like the asphalt that's out in front of your house, this batch is made a lot stronger. It's going to be pummeled by hundreds of massive aircraft every day. About half an hour before any overnight planes are rerouted to the standby runway, Gatwick meets with Colas and the wider contractor team to plan the night ahead. Technically, this project isn't that complicated. The team is ripping up the old asphalt and laying down new material. It's the same process that's used on runways around the world. But here at Gatwick, they don't have the luxury of shifting all their flights to another runway while construction takes place. So at 9:30 p.m. sharp, a crew of more than 100 people start a pretty dramatic race against time.
Believe it or not, this is currently Gatwick Airport's runway. It's the middle of the night, but it is a hive of activity here. Hundreds of people in this construction team are working to take up the old surface of the runway, lay a new surface and get the runway checked and reopened again, all before those planes that are currently in the air start landing.
The work moves in a sequence that's repeated every night until they finally get to the very end of the runway. First, the lights that guide pilots are turned off and removed. Then, a fleet of machines lift up the existing asphalt and take it to be recycled. Next comes the paving machines that lay 2 new layers of asphalt. The biggest challenge is making sure it cools in time before the first planes land, and this being London, the rain is your enemy. Once the new surface is laid, a team of electricians put all the lighting back in place, ready for the next day. Now, this is all happening in a matter of hours every night, while flights are landing just over 100 metres away on the standby runway, and all while a queue of planes are lining up just off the site to carry the first passengers of the day. If the team gets any more than 15 minutes off track, they need to move straight into one of the many contingency plans that are kept in a playbook.
We sat for weeks in rooms coming up with every conceivable failure you could possibly come up with. In a normal job, would you do it? No. But when every 15 minutes is critical, actually having the solution and not having to stand there for half an hour and work out what it is the difference between failure and success quite often.
If they're even a few minutes late cleaning up, or the asphalt isn't totally cool, there'll be a lot of angry airlines and passengers waiting to get moving. Anyone that's ever travelled through an airport will know that's a demographic you don't really want to upset. Gatwick's ambitions go beyond this project. Remember that standby runway they have in case of emergencies? Well, they're in the proposal phase of turning that into a fully functional second runway. The plan to do that has been in the works for years now, but it's faced a lot of opposition from people who say the added noise and air pollution would be bad for the region. But it would make construction projects like this a whole lot easier, and it would enable even more flights to pass through here every day.
So all the time we have to be really focused on the fact that we're here to deliver a service for our airlines, and if we don't do that, it has impacts that can literally go worldwide, and that's quite sobering when you start thinking about it, and it's why sometimes I try and avoid thinking about it too much. But yeah, that's just how interconnected worldwide aviation is. One runway resurfacing can knock on around the world.
Getting to spend the night with construction teams like this is a really humbling experience. You know, what looks like a simple bit of resurfacing isn't that. It's a major operation that's been months in the planning and it's taken hundreds of people to organise. The work these guys are doing is depended on by millions of passengers, hundreds of businesses and the wider economy. And for me, really underlines once again the impact of this industry. You know, it touches every single part of our lives and enables so much of our world to happen.
They're some of the biggest and busiest places in the world. In 2019, the last normal year, they collectively handled over 60 million tonnes of freight and more than 4 billion people. Initially able to operate with just a few hangars and an airstrip, the advent of jet engines saw things really take off, and as passenger numbers grew, so too did the airports. Today they're like mini-cities with massive terminals, control towers, multiple runways, hotels, shops, car parks, maintenance hangars, logistics facilities, and a staff of thousands to keep them moving. Such insane scale makes them difficult to really fathom, so we've done a quick take-off and compared them to easily relatable references to reveal their actual size. Fasten your seatbelts, open your window blinds, and prepare to be amazed. This is the true scale of the world's largest airports. When it comes to airports, most of us instinctively think of the terminals themselves. Once simple waiting areas, they're now destinations in their own right, and have become some of the largest buildings in the world, places that many of us have spent hours wandering between connecting flights. The biggest of these is the main terminal at Turkey's new Istanbul airport with 1.4 million square metres under a single roof, and Terminal 3 at Dubai International with 1.7 million square metres spread across its 3 interconnected buildings. That's 2.3 and 2.7 times the floor space at the Pentagon, respectively. The size of a terminal is normally driven by an airport's capacity, and that is all about its runways. Runway lengths vary, but most tend to sit between 2.4 and 3.9 kilometres long. One exception can be found here, on the Tibetan Plateau in China. In this case, the reduced performance of engines at low air density and the greater speed needed for takeoff forced the little-known Kamdu Bandar Airport to construct the world's longest runway, stretching for a whopping 5.5 kilometres. That's longer than 2 Golden Gate bridges laid end to end. But due to some extreme weathering, that runway is now closed and has been replaced with a shorter one. The title is now held by Russia. Moscow's Zhukovsky International has a 5.4 kilometre runway that's equivalent to the distance from Rockefeller Center over Central Park and into Harlem. Alternatively, you can think of it as 61 Antonov AN-225s lined up wing to wing. But while size is important, it's what you do with it that really matters, and the world's busiest airports aren't actually the largest. Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson was the world's busiest airport in terms of passenger traffic from 1998 until 2019, when it served over 110 million passengers, equivalent to the entire population of the Philippines. But it lost the top spot to Guangzhou's Baiyun International in 2020 due to the pandemic. Atlanta's airport covers an area 39 times bigger than California's Disneyland, but that 19 square kilometers is kind of nothing. It's 7 times smaller than the biggest airport in the US, Denver International, which is more than twice the size of Manhattan. It's the same story over at one of the world's busiest cargo airports. After reclaiming nearly 10 square kilometres of land from the ocean in the 1990s, the 12.5 square kilometre Hong Kong International represented more than 1% of the city's entire landmass. It was officially the world's busiest cargo airport from 2010 until 2020, when FedEx's logistics superhub Memphis International reclaimed the title, helped by the huge growth in e-commerce. What's even more impressive is that with a 6.5 square kilometre land reclamation having just completed, and with only 24% of Hong Kong's land built upon, the airport represents a whopping 7.16% of Hong Kong's entire built-up area. Of course, not every city has the luxury of being able to easily expand its airports, and for some the answer is to have multiple sites all working in tandem. London's a pretty clear example of this. It has 6 commercial airports, and together they processed over 180 million passengers in 2019. That's enough capacity to send every Brit on an overseas holiday 3 times over. Spread out around Greater London, these airports cover a combined area of more than 30 square kilometres, the equivalent of everything north of the Thames from the Isle of Dogs up to Stratford, and as far west as Hyde Park. For football fans, that's 461 Wembley stadiums. But even the combined size of London's airports doesn't come close to the world's largest airport, one that surprisingly only serves around 10 million passengers each year, and that you've probably never heard of unless you're a fan of the Guinness World Records or pub trivia. Located in Dammam, Saudi Arabia, King Fahd International has an official area of over 776 square kilometres. It's bigger than 23 sovereign states, and if it was its own country, it would rank 173rd in the world, just ahead of neighbouring Bahrain. The airport actually got its enormous size during the Gulf War, when the US and coalition forces used it and the surrounding area as a military base and storage facility until operations could be transferred to the Ahmad Al Jaber Air Base in Kuwait. Today, a mere 36.7 square kilometres of the airport's official land area is actually used for operations. We're now hopefully not too much further away from international travel coming back after the pandemic, and with the industry expected to experience a bounce before returning to growth, the scale of these airports could soon be blown away. Imagine building an airport in a place like this. It's one of the hardest spots in the world to land a plane, and if you want to build, well, anything here, then you're in for a pretty tough time. But far up in the Northern Hemisphere, hundreds of kilometres inside the Arctic Circle, Greenland is embarking on the biggest infrastructure scheme in its history. No fewer than 3 airport projects are now underway across a territory that's covered in giant glaciers and freezing tundra with only a tiny population. So what does it really take to construct the runways, terminals and everything else needed for international flights in such an isolated and cold location? And why is it even happening at all? Everyone's heard of it, but how much do you really know about Greenland? It's that big white block of land we've all seen on a map hanging down between Canada and Iceland. You might think of it as being remote, sparse, and more than a bit nippy without a great deal of civilization. And sure, temperatures here can hit minus 25 degrees Celsius, and it has the lowest population density on Earth. But aside from that, there's actually a lot more to Greenland than many realise. You see, it's not just a load of ice. Like the Faroe Islands, it's an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, and humans do live here, about 56,000 of them, mostly in small coastal cities. Why not inland? Well, because the entire centre is covered in the only permanent ice sheet outside of Antarctica. It means that if you want to travel between these places, the only option is to fly. That's right, there are multiple airports in Greenland, including international ones, but they're small and only serve a handful of destinations. Only 2 are big enough to handle jets, and neither of them are close to the capital, Nuuk. To get there, you have to travel on one of the tiny propeller planes that are used across the island, and that is where the dilemma is. Greenland wants to become a bigger tourist destination, but that can't really happen when getting there is a bit of a hassle.
The Greenlandic economy is very dependent on fish. This means also that it has a certain kind of vulnerability to it, and there you wanted to strengthen the economy by building new pillars in the economy, and one of the pillars being tourism. In Nuuk, where I'm situated right now, around 60 to 65% of everybody going to Greenland actually goes to Nuuk, and today you will then have to fly to another airport, and then you'll have to do a domestic flight to get to Nuuk.
The solution? Well, build a series of newer, bigger airports that'll make this stunning country more accessible. It sounds simple when you put it like that, but construction of any kind in this part of the world is never straightforward. But before we delve into those difficulties, it's important to outline what Greenlanders are actually getting with these new airports. First of all, the capital's airport is being completely overhauled and is going to become the main hub for international flights from 2025. Upgrades include more than doubling the length of the runway to 2,200 metres and a new terminal with an apron. It'll also be equipped with 2 taxiways, a new control tower and service buildings. A similar arrangement is happening in Ilulissat, Greenland's 3rd largest city, which also has an existing airport. The new airport being built there, alongside the one in Nuuk, will have the same length runway and a list of other improvements that'll be almost identical. Lastly, down in the south of the island, my god, how do I say that? Qarqotuk. Lastly, down in the south of the island, the town of Qarqotuk is getting its first ever airport. With a 1,500 metre runway and capacity for just 200 passengers at a time, it'll be smaller than the other 2 and used almost exclusively for domestic flights. Those longer runways in Nuuk and Ilulissat will allow bigger planes to land and take off, meaning more passengers from destinations further away. They're also being fitted with instrument landing systems that make it easier to land when there's reduced visibility. In fact, that's just one of many challenges pilots can face when trying to put a plane down in this location. The giant fjords surrounding some airports can cause sudden gusts of wind, low-level fog is not unusual, and runways are often covered in snow or frozen entirely. Those sub-zero conditions aren't exactly great for construction either.
The airport is located 300 kilometers north of the polar circle, so you have a very long winter season where it's solid frozen, the water, where you of course cannot work on cleaning up seabed, etc., etc. So there are a lot of challenges in terms of that.
So what's it like to build on one of the most inconvenient ground types you can imagine? Arctic tundra. It's where you've got a very cold, barren, treeless landscape on the surface and a layer of permafrost underneath. It can be as hard as concrete in some places, so when you've got to do any kind of excavation, like before laying a runway, it's virtually impossible to do using normal methods. By that, we mean bringing in some excavators and getting them to dig away happily through the lovely soft soil that most airports are built on. It's just not as simple as that here, which is why main contractor Monk Civil Engineering has had to use a strategy that's normally reserved for tunnelling. Blowing the obstacle to bits with explosives. For the larger 2 airports, around 6 million cubic metres of rock had to be blasted away for construction to take place. That's more than twice the volume of the Great Pyramid.
The majority of the time that we have spent on construction so far has actually been drilling, blasting and moving of rock. We have literally blown a mountain away in order to make enough space to get a 2.2 kilometer runway.
In Qarqotuk, it was 2 million cubic metres. The material was then ground up and used to build the runways and foundations for the buildings and infrastructure. Over in Nuuk, the runway was done in 2 stages, with the southern end constructed first. When complete, air traffic moved over from the old runway, while the northern end of the new one was still being built. A map of the Ilulissat runway shows that some of it goes into the sea. That meant removing a thick layer of clay sediment, which then had to be backfilled to avoid settlement over time. To do this, a huge 200-ton crawler crane from Liebherr was brought in to handle all that dredging, as well as other tasks. These included placing large stones alongside the runway to protect it from coastal waters. Crew members had to rely on weekly shipments for parts and equipment, and worked long shifts to stay on schedule. Because while life in this part of the world might seem laid back and peaceful, the bitterly cold climate ensures the clock is always ticking. The winter months are when the mercury drops way below freezing, which makes any kind of construction here impossible, even with your biggest coat on. Between December and April, work had to stop entirely, and some jobs could only be done during a small summer period. As for when it's all due to finish, like with many large-scale infrastructure projects, there have been some delays. Nuuk's new airport was initially set to open in 2023, but that had to be pushed back to late 2024. That was mainly due to COVID and new regulations coming in since the original plan was drawn up. But it wasn't the only complication that appeared during the project's conception.
The runway in Ilulissat has unfortunately been a little bit delayed because we have faced some issues construction-wise. We had 13 weeks where we couldn't get supplies into the construction site. So the construction site was basically closed for 13 weeks because, well, the water was frozen. So you can prepare everything, but you can't set the date on when the weather is ready for you to start doing these kind of things.
Ilulissat is now due to complete in 2026, same as Qaqortoq. Then there was the issue that came up earlier on. Before it was decided which companies would do the construction, a state-owned Chinese firm bid for the job. The trouble was, Greenland is a key strategic point for the United States. There's still a US Air Force base here, which is also part of a large missile defense system. The idea of Chinese-made airports close to a US military site made things a little tense, and the bid was dropped. Instead, Denmark would help build and fund the projects. Which brings us on in turn to the price tag. In total, the scheme was expected to cost around 5 billion Danish kroner, which is about $700 million US. Qaqortoq has been financed solely by the Greenlandic government, while the other two are a partnership with Denmark, which owns a third of the project. The money not covered by equity, which is around half of the cost, has been borrowed from the Danish Central Bank and the Nordic Investment Bank. Although it might not sound like much for 3 airports, for a country the size of this, it is a lot. The total figure is about 20% of Greenland's GDP. But it's what these airports could do for the economy in the future that is where the real potential payoff is. Currently, foreign tourism brings in almost 2 billion Danish kroner a year. With the new airports close to opening, that amount is almost certain to rise in the coming decade. Not long ago, building 3 major airports in a place like this would have seemed ridiculous. But thanks to some extreme construction, some amazing teams, and some very big ambitions, this amazing location is about to pull off something extraordinary.
This is not about building a second airport in Berlin or a third runway in Heathrow. This is about making development possible in a country that will be able to change also the economy of the country.
Once again, it powerfully demonstrates that not many places on this planet are out of reach when the people that work in this incredible industry really put their minds to it. Here's a story about the most terrifying airport in the world. Your plane is diving straight for a mountain when at 700 meters they turn off the autopilots. You scrape over the rooftops of the city close enough to see inside people's homes. And just over 3 kilometers out from landing and 300 meters off the ground, the pilot ignores their instruments, eyeballs a 47-degree turn, and touches down on a slither of runway surrounded by water on 3 sides. A heart attack averted, the plane door opens and you step out onto the asphalt of the legendary Kai Tak International Airport, Hong Kong. It's also the 5th of July 1998 and you were on the last flight to land here before it permanently closed. Skip forward 26 years and this area's come quite a long way. What was once a relic of a bygone era is now the centre of one of the world's most expensive redevelopment projects. Most importantly, getting into it is going to be much easier as well, thanks to some world-class engineering and a new piece of equipment we've never seen before, which quite literally reinvents the wheel. This is Hong Kong. Forget terrifying airports, today this city lays proud claim to having the best public transport in the world. Its trains, trams, ferries and buses provide 9.7 million journeys every day. Almost half of all households are within 500 metres of an MTR station, and trains arrive on time an incredible 99.9% of the time. Part of the reason Hong Kong's infrastructure is so good is because it has to be. 7.4 million people live here, mainly squeezed into super tight pockets of housing, which are among the most densely populated on Earth. Between these urban centres are around 500 mountains and the South China Sea. So anything that gets built here has got to be built with infrastructure in mind. Back to Kai Tak. The site of the old airport is located right in the heart of the city, here in Kowloon Bay. In 2007, a plan was approved which would turn the 320-hectare site into a mixed-use residential, commercial and leisure district. The tip of the former runway is being transformed into a tourism and leisure hub, featuring a Foster & Partners designed cruise terminal which opened in 2013. The rest of the site, meanwhile, is being transformed into a premium office and commercial district and a very large park. At the top of the site, a 50,000-seat stadium is nearing completion and work is well underway on a large residential neighbourhood. When it's completed, 150,000 people are going to live on this site, making it one of the densest urban areas in the world. And connecting all those people to the rest of the city is a major challenge. The north of the site is bordered by two of the busiest roads in East Kowloon. To stop the development being cut off from everything else, a series of tunnels and bridges are being constructed around the perimeter of the site. But with such a dense network of roads, how do you build something that's big enough to meet capacity while not having any impact on the constant flow of traffic nearby? That's a headache for Hong Kong's civil engineers, who are dedicated to making sure that people's journeys around the city are as smooth as they can be. Balancing the needs of the development and the demands of heavy traffic was a problem the Hong Kong Civil Engineering and Development Department faced here, where a 140-metre-long tunnel was needed to connect Shin Kai Road to Choi Hung Estate. Now, with shallow underpasses like this, the easiest option is often to use the cut and cover method. This involves digging a trench and laying tunnel segments, which are then covered back over. But here, that would involve diverting 20 lanes of traffic, including two major arterial roads. No problem, time to fire up a tunnel boring machine and get digging. But actually, that's not an option either. Because Hong Kong is so dense, the land underneath this area is crossed by a series of water mains, electric cables, storm drains, sewers, and foundations for the Kwun Tong Bypass Viaduct. Had the tunnel been deep enough, that wouldn't be a problem, but for such a short route, a shallower tunnel was needed, which would expose a crucial flaw of TBMs. You see, when a TBM makes its way through the earth, it creates an effect called settlement. As it excavates soil, this creates weakness in the ground above the cutterhead as earth moves down to fill the void. Now, with enough clearance, this doesn't have any effect on anything above, but the alignment at Choi Hung lies just under 7 metres beneath the surface at its shallowest point. This effect of settlement, made worse by the weak alluvial soil, would pose a serious risk to the nearby utilities like this storm drain, which sits just 1.5 metres away from the tunnel roof. So, how do you solve a problem like the one at Choi Hung? Well, the answer was this: a rectangular tunnel boring machine. This was the first of its kind ever to be used in Hong Kong, and one of only a handful RTBMs in the entire world. Here's how it works. The rectangular shield houses 5 cutting heads. The one in the centre does the majority of the work, but the 4 in each corner rotate elliptically, creating a rectangular excavation. This gets dropped into a shaft and is pushed forwards by a hydraulic jack. To reinforce the tunnel, 92 concrete segments cast nearby are dropped in behind the RTBM one at a time. When the tunnel breaks through and is complete, the jack seals the gaskets and the RTBM is removed on the other side. But how is this safer than a standard TBM? Well, when a circular TBM creates settlement, that force is focused onto a point at the top of the cutterhead. Because the RTBM has a large flat surface, it spreads the effect of the settlement over a larger area, causing less disruption to anything above it. The Choi Hung Tunnel opened in November 2021, and the method has proved so successful that it's now being used elsewhere on the project, such as here at Sungwon Toi, where a new underpass is being constructed beneath 15 lanes of traffic. But what is this all for? There's a huge amount of effort going into using the next generation of tech. Surely this tunnel's being used for a major new highway or high-speed rail line. Well, no. Both the Choi Hung and Sungwon Toi tunnels are both pedestrian subways. Now, it might seem surprising that such a massive amount of work and innovation is going into something as simple as a pedestrian underpass. But that's kind of the point. Attention to detail on something as small as this is exactly what makes Hong Kong's civil engineers some of the best in the world, and what allows this city to keep moving. In the 1990s, Hong Kong needed to replace its outdated airport. The only problem was the same problem that always comes up in a densely developed city that's surrounded by mountains. Where do you put it? Well, the answer was actually to make the city bigger, and Hong Kong reclaimed 10 square kilometres of ocean before building what was then the world's largest airport terminal on top of it. 20 years later, that airport is itself now approaching capacity, and $18 billion is being spent to expand it and the city once again. When it opened in 1998, Hong Kong International Airport was one of the most advanced in the world. Built on a man-made island, the buildings and transport connections were world-class, while a dual runway layout let 28 million passengers pass through the airport in its first year alone. Handed back to China by the British in 1997, Hong Kong was uniquely positioned to act as a bridge for Western companies looking to get into those emerging Chinese markets. This, and the fact that it sits less than 5 hours flight from nearly half the world's population, pushed passenger and freight volumes to the extreme. The construction of a satellite concourse and second terminal in 2007, as well as a midfield concourse in 2011, didn't really solve the problem, and the need to think a bit bigger became clear. After a 3-year study and a rejected plan to try and increase the airport's capacity by simply improving operational efficiency, a new 3-runway system was adopted. The immense project known as Master Plan 2030 is basically like constructing an entirely new airport next to the existing one. There'll be a 3.8 kilometre new runway on reclaimed land, enabling 100 million passengers and some 9 million tonnes of cargo to pass through the airport each year. Once complete, the new runway will take over operations from the existing North Runway while it's reconfigured to allow Runway 3 arrivals to access Terminal 1 without having to cross the centre runway. A 280,000 square metre new passenger concourse will support it, linking to a reconfigured and expanded Terminal 2 by a 2.6 kilometre extension to the Automated People Mover, or APM. Running between Terminal 2 and the new concourse, the APM will transport up to 10,800 passengers each hour. Behind the scenes, there'll also be a new $500 million high-speed baggage handling system that can move bags 3 times faster, and smart tech to streamline the departure process. With an additional 30 million passengers using the airport each year, the existing road and transport systems will be expanded, increasing connections to the city proper and mainland China. To accommodate all this, a further 6.5 square kilometres of land will be reclaimed from the sea directly north of the existing airport. Due to environmental concerns over contaminated soil and increased shortages of materials like marine sand, the land will be built with a process known as deep cement mixing. This involves injecting cement into soft or contaminated soil, stabilising it and removing the need for environmentally damaging dredging to take place, before material is added to raise the land above sea level. With the land reclamation phase now nearing completion, work on the above-ground infrastructure is about to start. Despite the collapse in international travel during 2020 and the ongoing uncertainty, work has progressed, and passenger numbers are expected to return to pre-pandemic levels well before the project's completion in 2024. Set to contribute 4.6% of Hong Kong's entire GDP by 2030, this aviation megaproject is the key to the city's future competitiveness and role in the global economy. Underground tunnels that serve as secret bunkers crawling with aliens and lizard people. An array of strange symbols linked to the Illuminati and the New World Order. Sinister murals that hint towards the world apocalypse. And a cursed blue horse sculpture with piercing red eyes known as Blucifer. These are just some of the many strange conspiracies you might have heard about when flying through Colorado's Denver International Airport. Ever since its construction, outlandish rumours have been a hot topic among conspiracy theorists, and in recent years, ones the airport itself has fully embraced.
Welcome to Illuminati headquarters. Denver International Airport.
But mysterious murals and odd symbols might not be the only thing you've noticed in Denver.
By now, you've likely experienced some turbulence navigating around the construction at DIA.
As America's third busiest airport, with over 58 million flyers in 2021, Denver's racing to keep up with increasing passenger demand, and its $4.3 billion reconstruction project is aiming to complete by 2028. But it hasn't been without unexpected delays, all of which seems to be further raising suspicion among the conspiracy sleuths. So how does the world's weirdest airport plan to accommodate more travellers, and is it really all just a cover-up for something more cryptic going on behind closed doors? Welcome to one of the world's strangest construction projects. Denver International's pretty much always been shrouded in controversy. Before opening back in 1995, its construction was a target of public opposition. Many believed the original Stapleton Airport was perfectly acceptable and that any new facility would just bring more traffic and pollution to the area. But Stapleton was already bursting at the seams, and the site wasn't nearly large enough for the size of expansion needed. So in 1989, Colorado began building an entirely new airport on the northeast edge of Denver, far away from anything else, and Stapleton was abandoned completely. The project didn't go well. The airport was supposed to complete in 1993, but a complex design, financial struggles, and some contractual disputes meant the first plane didn't take off until 16 months later in 1995. By that stage, the whole thing was $2 billion over budget. People began to question things, and it didn't take long before several conspiracy theories began circulating. Why was construction so delayed? What was that extra $2 billion really used for? Tunnels housing a new innovative baggage system failed to work properly, and a dedication plaque bearing the symbol of the Freemasons, a legitimate secret society, all raised eyebrows. The airport's strange artwork only added fuel to the fire. Many were also suspicious of the airport's sheer size. When construction was completed, it became the largest in the US by surface area at over 130 square kilometers. That's twice the size of Manhattan. Just like Stapleton, Denver began having trouble keeping up with increasing passenger demand over the years, and its facilities were aging quickly. Designed to handle up to 50 million people a year, the airport saw nearly 60 million pass through in 2021. And those numbers are going to grow to nearly 100 million over the next 8 to 10 years. To get ready for the future, Denver has devised a plan, and in 2018 it started work on two major construction projects. First off, the Great Hall is undergoing a $2 billion renovation. Transport to the gates will also be improved by adding and replacing outdated train cars. In the second project, concourses are adding some 39 new gates, creating space for more passengers and more planes.
We have Vision 100, which is really aimed at preparing all the different parts so that we're able to handle all the passengers. So the Great Hall program will add the capacity in our terminal to get people to the gates. We'll be increasing our security checkpoints by over 60%.
The Great Hall work is being done in 3 phases. Each aims to enhance airport security, improve overall operational efficiency, and increase capacity. Phase 1 was completed in late 2021 and created nearly 3,000 square metres of additional space for the Jeppesen terminal. It also modernised the check-in space by installing self-bag drop units.
But Phase 1 of the Great Hall didn't come without a great deal of pain for air travelers.
You have to just be willing to read the signs and ask questions. Pay attention and know where you're going.
Similar to the challenges seen in the airport's original construction, the project hit some turbulence early on.
Phase 1's completion is nearly 2 years behind schedule.
According to a report filed by Great Hall Partners, the contractors in charge of the project, the delays were down to the concrete. The material found in the terminal was weaker than expected and could not bear the weight of the equipment. Due to safety concerns, construction was halted completely. But when it was tested further by the airport, no safety issues were found. A load of back and forth was set off between the contractors and Denver International, and the internet got a whole new pile of fodder for its conspiracies.
So the original Great Hall project was going to be completed through a public-private partnership, and that contract ended up being terminated a couple years ago. Now we're moving into the program where we aren't using a concessionaire.
That concessionaire is Hensel Phelps, who was brought in to complete the project instead. In 2021, Phase 2 finally took off, and that looks set to finish by 2024. This phase includes redesigning a new security checkpoint with improved technology. Much like European airports, the updated plan will see smaller groups of 30 to 40 people going through 17 lanes of security, instead of all queuing up in one long line. Additionally, the balcony of the Great Hall is going to be extended out to create more space. Meanwhile, it wasn't until 2022 that the city's council approved the third and final phase of the project. Phase 3 will add yet another security checkpoint and new check-in areas for all remaining airlines. It'll also upgrade facilities like bathrooms, floors and lighting. Overall, the airport hopes the final project is going to be wheels up by 2028. Now, like most construction projects, the renovations at Denver Airport have been pretty noticeable.
Walls are being torn out, retail stores moved, and some escalators aren't even there anymore. This is what it looks like in the airport's construction zone.
Giant white walls block off sections of the terminal's ongoing work, and nothing sets off conspiracy theorists quite like that. But instead of letting the rumours hold it back, Denver's taking advantage.
Our former CEO, Kim Day, she loved that we could show some personality. And yeah, we wanted to do something fun and creative to talk about the construction. And we like to embrace the fun side of things. So we developed a campaign around the conspiracies to go in the Great Hall.
Plastered along all these white walls are quirky posters alluding to the airport's conspiracy theories. There's even that talking gargoyle that interacts with passengers.
It's because of the conspiracy. Oh, it's because of the conspiracy. Look at me, I'm a little know-it-all.
The marketing stunt has proved very successful for the airport. According to the public relations team, these efforts have resulted in over $1.5 million worth of publicity. Of course, if you were sitting on the actual Illuminati headquarters, then a fun little media campaign like this would be a great way of throwing people off the scent. You won't be surprised to learn that the official line in response to these conspiracies is all a bit dull. The artwork is just artwork, and the odd symbols merely represent the idea of a new international and global airport. And as for the tunnels...
Really, our tunnels are just to get baggage through the airport and, across our concourses.
Of course, Stephanie would say that, because that's what she wants us to think. And when we pressed her further about any other theories...
I cannot speak on that. I will neither confirm nor deny.
Together, the gate expansion and the Great Hall projects hope to help Denver Airport as passenger numbers continue to rise over the next few years.
We're also looking at additional runway capacity. So we currently have 6 runways that are operating. The original layout for the airport had 12 runways identified. So we're just starting the environmental work to take a look at where to put that 7th runway and anticipating it would be needed within the next 10 years.
In all, Denver seems to be on track to navigate its challenges and complete its work by 2028, ready for the first major meeting of the New World Order. We mean increased passenger capacity. If I disappear in mysterious circumstances after this video comes out, then please never stop asking questions until you find the truth. New York is renowned as a world-class city. Its biggest airport, on the other hand, not so much.
JFK is the worst airport in the country when it comes to dealing with luggage.
At JFK Airport, a temporary system outage at customs left travelers waiting for hours in security lines.
A water main break flooded most of Terminal 4 at JFK International Airport yesterday.
Once regarded as one of the top airports in the country, John F. Kennedy Airport has somewhat fallen from grace. With its outdated facilities, frequent delays, and disjointed layouts, it now has a turbulent reputation among travellers. But that's all about to change, because New York's busiest airport is undergoing a massive $19 billion overhaul. With fresh amenities, expansion of spaces, and a brand new terminal, JFK will soon be taking off to new heights. So fasten your seatbelt, sit back, relax, and enjoy our explainer on how this New York aviation hub is going to take back its world-class title. Originally called Idlewild Airport, JFK was built to relieve congestion at LaGuardia in 1948. It opened with 6 runways and 5 distinct and architecturally stunning terminals. By the next decade, the airport was handling the largest amount of international air traffic in the world and was the first place to serve passenger jets. But JFK's globally renowned status soon took a nosedive. With increased demand and a terminal layout designed pre-jet age, it simply couldn't keep up. Today, with over 62 million annual passengers, it's still one of the busiest in the country. And yet, it consistently ranks as one of the worst hubs to travel through due to significant delays, a disjointed layout, and its bad accessibility from the city. Typically, terminals are controlled by the airport's owner or operator and are all connected in a central area. But JFK is different. Instead, it had 6 disconnected terminals, 5 of which are currently active, that are managed by the airlines themselves. That can make it difficult for passengers to transfer in between on layovers, and airlines can never divert to a different terminal because each one only accepts planes from their owner. And because the terminals have been rebuilt or demolished over the years, they're still numbered 1 through 8, just with a couple of numbers missing in between to make things even more confusing. It's not surprising that what was once regarded as the top airport by pilots and passengers alike now fills most travellers' heads with dread. With a projected 100 million passengers by 2050, well beyond its initial capacity, city officials have finally decided to act.
The panel has put forward a vision plan for the entire airport that will completely transform JFK into a unified, interconnected, world-class airport.
The plan consists of revamping the terminals and improving the roadway and transit system between them. At the heart of the project is the new Terminal 1. With 23 gates and 2.5 million square feet of space, it'll be nearly the size of LaGuardia's 2 new terminals combined, making it easily the largest at JFK.
Our gate capacity will offer global airlines the flexibility to upgrade aircraft when needed to meet demand. As it relates to the airline partners, we're talking about capacity. And remember, at JFK, it's very competitive. There's a big push to have access to gates.
The $9.5 billion project will include new departures, arrivals, and customs halls, along with public spaces, amenities, and state-of-the-art tech.
The new technology will include the use of biometrics to help provide a seamless experience through the airport. The terminal will also be home to a solar array by our partner, Alpha Structure, that will indeed be the largest in New York City, and it will enable the terminal to be fully resilient in the event of any power disruption.
Large open areas are going to be filled with natural light, something set to be warmly welcomed by passengers who've kind of become accustomed to those dark and dreary terminals. Set to finish in 2030, the new Terminal 1 is going to be completed in phases, with the new halls and a portion of the gate set to open by 2026. But while that may be the biggest new terminal, it's not the only one. Terminal 6 will stretch 1.2 million square feet across a 2-level concourse. There'll be a giant new check-in space with a centralised security area, which means travellers won't have to drag their luggage as far. This will open out into the East Hall with additional dining and retail facilities, which will ultimately link through to Terminal 5, making connections between the two terminals much easier. The construction here is due to finish around 2028. In addition to those big brand new terminals, the two remaining terminals are going to get new shops, restaurants and upgrades throughout. But outdated terminals are just one part of JFK's problem. To properly address the connection issues between these facilities, the airport is reconfiguring its roadway transportation network. With new roads, bridges and enhanced traffic tech, travellers are going to have an easier time navigating between the terminals. They're also reducing the number of roadway loops from 5 down to 2, in theory making it less confusing. All of that creates more space for cars to circle through and less chance of congestion. Also included is a multi-level parking facility with nearly 2,000 spaces and an eco-friendly timber exterior. A 122-metre new pedestrian bridge equipped with a rainwater harvesting system is going to link the car park over into Terminal 1. Now, as you might imagine, all this construction doesn't come without some disruption. The air train is being temporarily shut down at Terminal 1, which means passengers will instead have to take a shuttle bus to another terminal. And perhaps one of the biggest construction challenges is the location of JFK Airport itself. Because it's surrounded by dense neighbourhoods and congested highways, delivering and hauling away materials is not exactly straightforward. So instead of relying on trucks going against heavy traffic, workers are turning to another artery: the waterways. Barges carrying rocks and sand are going to navigate back and forth as far away as the New York Catskills, 40 kilometres to the north, as they're being pulled by tugboats. They'll float down the Hudson River and across the bay into a makeshift dock that's been constructed using temporary floating platforms on the western side of the airport. Now, city officials say this alternative could eliminate as many as 300,000 roundway trips on trucks throughout the course of the project. Just one of these barges equates to 200 truckloads alone. Less vehicles on roadways means less traffic and pollution created by the project. But the alternative can be a little bit more unpredictable. According to this report by the New York Times, a storm delayed one tugboat from reaching the dock because it was churning up massive swells around the surrounding bay. The city is also building its own concrete plant to produce the roughly 550,000 square metres expected to be used at the JFK works. That's enough to fill about 218 Olympic pools. Now, producing this much concrete isn't great for the environment, but officials hope that locating production on site will allow for easier reuse of materials, which can ultimately help to bring carbon footprints down. JFK was once a renowned airport among travellers and pilots, but as it's gotten busier, it hasn't been able to keep up with the increased demand. It's one of the many New York airports undergoing a massive overhaul to keep pace with the city's world-class status. While projects like this might be regarded as best in class when they first open, if they don't continue to update, then they're going to get left behind. So it's important to upgrade or else risk an unfavourable outcome. Thankfully, New York has recognised the risks and is working to fix it before it's too late. This was once the world's busiest airport. Chicago's O'Hare International held the title for 3 decades and became one of the great American infrastructure projects of the early jet age. But in recent years, it's hit a bit of turbulence.
More long lines today at airports here in Chicago.
International travelers were shoulder to shoulder for hours.
Many people had to spend the night at O'Hare after missing their flights.
Though it still attracts more than 80 million passengers in a normal year, most of these people probably don't have this down as their favourite place to fly from. Delays, congestion and a lack of amenities are common complaints. And since the late 1990s, the place has begun to feel more than a bit tired. But that's all about to change as O'Hare embarks on a multi-billion-dollar transformation. a mega project that'll give this aviation landmark a much-needed lift.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chicago's O'Hare International Airport.
O'Hare first started commercial operations in the mid-1950s and has since developed into one of America's leading transport hubs. Built on a site where military planes were made during World War II, the dawn of peacetime saw it transition into a new role as the city's international airport and start to break new ground in aviation. It was here that features like concourses, jet bridges, and direct highway access, things we now take for granted with airports, all appeared for the first time anywhere. Today, in almost every category you could think to rank US airports with, you'll find it somewhere near the top. Prior to COVID, O'Hare reportedly offered more destinations than any other. It was third by number of airlines, fourth busiest, seventh largest by overall size, you get the idea. It's big, bustling and important, but O'Hare is known for some less desirable reasons too. Terminals are often cramped, the facilities are not the most welcoming, and operators struggle to keep flights on schedule. These issues have been around for quite a while, and the planned modernisation of this particular airport couldn't come soon enough. Fortunately, one major headache of a job that needed doing has just been finished. To help the place operate more efficiently, O'Hare's runway system has just been totally restructured. Before, there were 6 intersecting runways, but now there are 8 running in parallel, which means more capacity. 4 new strips had to be constructed, 2 were extended, and old ones had to be removed. There were 2 more air traffic control towers added as well, all while the airport was kept running in the background. It's why the project took 16 years and $6 billion to complete. With that out of the way, attention's now turning to the project that'll probably make the most difference for passengers. The $8.5 billion O'Hare 21 scheme involves building an entire new terminal and revamping another, and the construction of 2 new satellite concourses. When it's all finished in 2028, the hope is that the airport will be better enabled to become an international hub that meets the needs of the 21st century traveller, hence the name. One of the main ways it hopes to do that is through the new look Terminal 2, and that's where the biggest chunk of money is being spent. More than twice the size of the existing Terminal 2, the $2.2 billion global terminal was designed to evoke the city of Chicago in several ways. Conceived by Studio Ord, a team led by local architect Studio Gang, the building's Y-shaped form was inspired by the Chicago River as it passes through the city, bringing terminal and concourse functions as well as domestic and international arrivals all under one roof. That roof is evidently one of the project's highlights. With steel trusses and wood cladding arranged in a pleated design, it'll maximise natural daylight and energy efficiency, with a glass 6-pointed star called the Oculus at its centre. Below this, the building's 3 branches come together to form an area that apparently resembles a typical Chicago street, used for events, live music and informal gatherings in amongst the trees and greenery. Now, all of this has to happen while ensuring O'Hare operates as normal with absolutely zero reduction in service. And that's where the new satellite concourses come in. Equipped with flexible gates to suit both wide and narrow-body planes, they're being built before Terminal 2 gets underway, and for good reason. As work progresses on the main terminal, areas being worked on will divert to here, and because they're permanent, they'll give a huge boost to overall capacity once everything's done. Now, while work on Terminal 2 won't start until 2025, the improvements to Terminal 5, the one that seems to get the most criticism, have already started. Modernising this part of the airport involves adding over 30,000 square metres of extra space, including 10 new gates, a move that'll boost its capacity by 25%, and making the existing ones bigger so they can accommodate wider-bodied aircraft like Boeing's 787 Dreamliner. Areas like airline lounges are getting a makeover too, and the 25-year-old baggage handling system is finally being replaced. There are upgrades outside as well, including expanding the surrounding roadways and the parking infrastructure. It's the first major overhaul of the building since it was unveiled in 1993. All in all, there's a lot going on. To keep this project and their sanity on track, construction teams are going to have to manage vast amounts of digital information and make sure that the right people can get their hands on it at the right time.
In an airport project, a design document carries over 1 million objects, and that's a lot of data.
Müge Sumerol is head consultant at Rama IS, a company based in Istanbul that helps clients like airport builders implement new digital technologies.
Nowadays, the airports are much bigger and they have time constraints. So it's important that when people get together, work on that data, that they should be able to follow what the other person can do.
On massive projects like this, that's where tools like Ignite come in. It lets teams easily share files of various types and sizes and collaborate on them in real time. Bringing all of this information out of its silos and into one place creates a common data environment for projects. It's like a single source of truth that everyone can depend on, regardless of where they are or which device they're using. Everything from design updates to drone shots and 360-degree images captured across the terminal sites can be transferred instantly to one secure location, even in low bandwidth areas. With Ignite's integrations to some of the industry's most popular software, users like the ones Rama IS work with know their information is synchronized and protected from threats like ransomware.
We were looking for an environment, an infrastructure that would be easy to install, can work offline, online, and on-premise, as well as easy to maintain, so that we don't have a lot of support people. Ignite satisfies all those points.
Technology will be critical to O'Hare 21 avoiding the kind of delays that have crept in elsewhere at the airport, like the People Mover, which is finally back in service more than 2 years late. The inevitable challenges aside, the complex work that's about to happen in Chicago is likely to be repeated in towns and cities across America as the country works to upgrade its infrastructure while keeping everything moving. It's still early days for O'Hare 21, and the biggest part of the scheme is just about to start. But if this megaproject can hold its flight path, then by the end of the decade, Chicago should have an airport to be proud of once again. It's no secret that the Dutch are big fans of biking culture, but there's another mode of transit holding the ultimate boarding pass in this country. With over 62 million passengers in 2023, Schiphol Airport ranks as one of Europe's busiest hubs. That's largely thanks to its centralised location and historical ties to long-haul destinations in other parts of the world. For decades, it was considered one of the region's top travel hubs, but in recent years, its reputation has faced a bit of turbulence, and many haven't been happy with their experience. Now, the airport's looking to redeem itself by investing over $3 billion on construction projects. From enhanced passenger amenities to an impressive dual taxiway, Amsterdam wants to redefine the travel experience. But doing all that in the middle of a live airport, with thousands of people and flights moving through daily, is no easy task. So buckle up. This is how Amsterdam is upgrading one of Europe's most hated airports. Opening all the way back in 1916, Schiphol Airport was initially a small military airfield. But it didn't take long to grow in size. By the next year, it was already one of the largest airports in Europe. For the next couple of decades, it steadily continued growing. That was until the outbreak of World War II. The airport became a frequent target of German bombings, and by the end, Schiphol lay in ruins, forcing Amsterdam to rebuild. Fast forward to today, and the airport boasts a total of 6 runways and a main terminal that's divided into 4 zones, each with separate piers and gates. For years, Schiphol has topped the list of the world's best airports, loved by passengers and airlines alike. As a frequent spot for layovers, it's been known for its navigable layouts, and with over 300 direct flight paths offered around the world, it's the top connected European airport. Then came the summer of 2022. Largely due to labour shortages following the pandemic, the airport was plagued with hours-long security queues, lost baggage claims, delays, and frustrated travellers. At one point, it had to introduce capacity caps to keep up with demand. The result of all that was that the airport's world ranking plummeted down 14 spots to 29th place in 2023. Even officials admitted its poor performance during that year. So, with a tarnished image, Schiphol is looking to turn things around with a goal of focusing on quality over quantity. To do that, the airport is spending over $3 billion in improvements and upgrades, all of which is going to help increase capacity, which will ease queues and smooth passenger experience. Some of the key projects include a brand new pier, enhanced lounge areas, and the completion of a system known as a dual taxiway. Here's how the airport is navigating all of that construction work. First up, let's take a look at the layout. Now, as we said before, Schiphol was designed as a singular terminal. It's connected to 8 separate piers, each with several gates. Soon there's going to be a brand new pier, and that's been steadily progressing. At 370 metres long and 40 metres wide, there'll be new shops, security and border control points across 3 different floors. The construction works so far have faced some delays due to contract disputes, but there's still been steady progress. When it's complete, Pier A is going to provide 7 additional gates, 4 for narrow-body planes and 3 for wider plane designs. More gates means that more flights are going to be able to pass through, and by implementing a combination of solar panels, biomaterials and a glass facade, the roof and overall design is going to be eco-friendly. Also included in this airport's mega investment is an enhanced Lounge 1. Nearly 20 years old, this area is a bit outdated and in need of a fresh look. To do that, over 24,000 square metres are being redesigned, including transforming a previous crew member area. That'll create an additional 5,000 square metres of space, with 23 new retail, food and drink spots for passengers to enjoy. Despite the ongoing construction works, parts of the lounge are going to remain accessible for passengers. But coordinating that with so many people passing through is more than tricky. So to minimise the impact, the project's going to be completed in phases and will take place mostly overnight. Perhaps one of the most complex and ambitious parts of Amsterdam's update is the completion of a dual taxiway system. Let's take a look at the airport's layout. Right now, the main terminal is surrounded by 2-lane taxiways that planes use to come and go. The inner circle moves clockwise, while the outer flows counterclockwise. Together, they nearly form a ring. But the circle remains incomplete between this section. Here, planes must instead use a single-lane taxiway, which occasionally creates a bit of a backup, causing unnecessary congestion and delays. But that's all about to change. When fully complete, the dual taxiway is going to connect the existing sections via a new aircraft bridge over the A4 motorway, some of which has been built already. That's right, Amsterdam Airport Schiphol has built a bridge strong enough to carry an entire plane over one of the country's busiest roadways. The new bridge stretches 250 metres long, 60 metres wide, and stands around 6 metres high. And while airport bridges are not exactly new, they're still an incredible feat of engineering to look at. A big bridge calls for a big space, and several buildings in the vicinity needed to be demolished and cleared. Over 350,000 tonnes of sand were deposited along the motorway to elevate existing taxiways to the same level as the new bridge. To support both an aeroplane and the 32 million kilogram bridge itself, a strong foundation is a must. Workers drove 900 poles into the ground, which will act as a base for the concrete platform. The building of this epic bridge required temporary road closures, and to minimise impact on both traffic in the airport and on the road, it was mostly done at night. There's loads more happening at Schiphol too. Other highlights include a revamping of the existing Pier C, a brand new baggage hall, and the renewal of structures like passenger walkways and bridges, all of which is expected to complete by 2027. Amidst all the logistical challenges, the evolution of Schiphol Airport throughout the decades reflects its commitment to innovation and resilience. From its beginning as a small military airfield to becoming one of Europe's busiest aviation hubs for some time, the airport has continued to soar to new heights. Despite recent challenges, it remains dedicated to restoring itself as one of the world's top airports.
With the United States preparing to host both the 2026 FIFA World Cup and the 2028 Olympic Games, Los Angeles International Airport is undergoing one of the largest public work programs in Californian history. With new and improved terminals, world-class facilities, and a long-awaited connection to the city's public transport network, this is LA's $14 billion airport upgrade. From its origins as an unpaved landing strip in the 1920s, LAX has grown into one of the world's largest aviation hubs, welcoming 88 million passengers and seeing some 690,000 aircraft movements in 2019 alone. But while the airport has consistently ranked among the world's busiest, it's also infamous for poor passenger experience and extreme traffic congestion. Passenger numbers have more than doubled since the hub's last major upgrade ahead of the 1984 Olympics, and eyeing a new bid for the Games, Los Angeles World Airports have embarked on a 21st century overhaul. Though upgrades to runways and operating systems form a large part of the project, the most noticeable changes for passengers will be updates to each terminal, increasing aircraft capacity and improving traveller experience. The $1.9 billion redevelopment of the Tom Bradley International Terminal is the clearest example to date. With the terminal and concourses rebuilt from scratch, the project added 116,000 square metres of space and 18 new gates, 9 of which can accommodate wide-bodied aircraft like the A380. The terminal will be joined by a $1.6 billion new midfield satellite concourse in 2020. To accommodate projected growth, an 11-gate concourse alongside Terminal 1 and a new 12-gate Terminal 9 are already underway and set to be operational by 2028. But while the growth of LAX has put pressure on existing facilities for years, it is the congestion in and around the airport which is the biggest headache for travellers. With LAX lacking connections to other forms of transport, the only way to reach the terminals is via the notorious LAX Horseshoe, a 1.6-kilometre airport loop that often takes over an hour to drive around in peak times. The $5.5 billion Landside Access Modernisation Programme, or LAMP, was designed to cut traffic in the airport's core. At the heart of LAMP is the 3.6-kilometre Automated People Mover, or APM, which will connect the airport's terminals to new consolidated parking and rent-a-car facilities, and give LAX a long-awaited connection to the Los Angeles Metro. Operating 24 hours a day with 6 stations along its route, the APM will allow passengers to seamlessly transfer from the metro to their desired terminal in under 10 minutes, and is expected to carry 30 million people each year. Coordinating and building a project of this scale while keeping one of the world's busiest airports open is an extreme task that demands digital collaboration. With designers and engineers from 12 different trades working on over 180 design models across 33 offices in 22 cities and 5 different time zones, the expert team turned to Autodesk's BIM 360 platform. Using BIM 360 model coordination, the team is able to access information about the project from anywhere in the world at any time of day. Sharing their models and federating them in Autodesk BIM 360, designers used the software's automatic clash detection features to identify errors, track and address them before works were undertaken for real on-site, avoiding expensive mistakes, saving time and reducing risk. Giving the whole team access to see and understand the project digitally in 3-dimensional form from anywhere in the world before construction has been critical to the APM progressing on time and within budget. The teams on site are given high-quality construction issue information and can effectively build it right first time. From upgrading runways and expanding terminals to the addition of much-needed transport infrastructure, all while keeping the airport operational, it's easy to see how the upgrade at LAX is the largest public project in the city's history. As work continues in the build-up to 2028, regular travellers are set to see one of America's most notorious airports cruise at new heights in the years ahead. If you enjoyed this video and would like to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, subscribe to the B1M.